how's it going? It's me, Betty Jean. In today's video, we're continuing on with a series where I reflect on palettes that I've decluttered in the past. I did a few of these videos in this series last year after I'd done many years of playing with makeup and also doing eyeshadow palette declutters. And I kind of put it on pause because I'd kind of caught up a little bit, but I just brought this series back recently because another chunk of time has passed since I did that video and I have more things to talk about now. Let's kind of walk down memory lane. Do I have any regrets on decluttering anything? Did I completely forget certain things exist? We will find out today. Before we get into this palette's reminiscing kind of video, I did of course film this look. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, honestly. It should already be on Instagram and TikTok, and it'll be coming to YouTube Shorts very soon if it's not already up. As far as my accessories today, I don't know where this choker's from. It's just a basic choker. These plugs are Love Kills Boutique, and these earrings are from Spooky Doodle Club on Etsy. So yeah, without further ado, let's just hop in, walk down memory lane, and chat about some palettes that didn't quite survive my past declutters. I'm gonna do a little scooch so I have room for some pictures on the screen. Now in the last video, I talked about some Ace Beauté palettes that I've decluttered in the past, and I thought I talked about them all, but somehow I missed talking about this one. The Ace Beauté Blossom Passion palette. I loved this palette for a long time. I've mentioned before, but I lost my mind like back in, what was it, 2018 maybe, when Ace Beauté launched that bundle of 4 Paradise palettes. I thought it was so cool. I loved a bundle of eyeshadow palettes. It was like my favorite thing ever. And I thought this one was super cute, just kind of rosy, pinky tones. I had a blast with this one for a while. I did pick it up here and there over the years. And then this last year during my 2022 palette declutter video, I did end up letting this one go just because I found that at this point in my makeup collection, if I was thinking about using like pinks and stuff like that, this just wasn't my go-to anymore. And as much as I did enjoy it and had love for it, I just didn't want to hang on to it just for the sake of hanging on to things. So I ended up giving it to a friend. Obviously, everything I talk about in this video, I have since decluttered and given to friends. But yeah, this one did hold a special place in my heart for a while. Next up, moving into Alter Ego. This is a brand that kind of dupes color stories from other brands. I used to love this brand. Not to say that I don't. I do like their formulas, but I don't know, they're just not like my go-to anymore. This was the Temptress palette. This was a dupe for the ABH Sultry palette. I actually really loved this one for a long time. I never picked up the original Sultry palette, but I did like this color story. I liked kind of the glamorous, different tones of metallic. I liked that pop of coral. And I found that this was a really good, just like, if I wanted to feel really pretty and glam, this was a good one to go for. I don't remember exactly why I ended up decluttering this one. It probably just simply wasn't my go-to anymore for these kinds of tones. And really, I don't reach for neutrals very often. I'm definitely more of a colorful or grungy makeup girly, but every so often I do like to get a little more like glamified and wear things that are more just like pretty, so to speak. And I guess this just wasn't the one that I was reaching for anymore, so obviously I don't have it anymore. This next one is the Luster Charm. I believe this came out spring of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I was intrigued by this one just because some of the shimmers looked really pretty. I'm not sure exactly which palette this is duping. I think it's supposed to dupe one of the Pat McGrath ones, if I'm not mistaken. This one just didn't do enough for me. I just felt like, I mean, again, I'm not a neutral lover, so like I feel like going into this one, I should have known that this wouldn't really be my favorite, but it just wasn't for me. There was a really pretty, well, should have been really pretty shifty shadow. That very top left corner, it was supposed to be kind of like a duochrome-y kind of thing. It was a little bit of a drier texture. Wasn't my favorite. That fourth one on the top, that kind of champagne-y color, was a really pretty kind of squishy, metallic, shiny shade. But that particular formula wasn't enough to save this palette as a whole for me. It just wasn't quite my vibe. This next one is the Aurora palette. I believe this dupes the Natasha Denona, either Sunrise or Sunset, one of the two. I loved this one for a hot minute. It came out quite a few years ago. It was one of my go-to summer palettes. I loved the shimmers in here. I thought the bright mattes were super fun. I loved the different tones of yellow. And this one made me really happy. I believe I let this one go last year as well in my 2022 palette declutter. Just again, simply because if I'm gonna reach for tones like this just wasn't my go-to one anymore. I had things that I was preferring, formulas that I was liking more, maybe more special shimmers or more vibrant mattes, which these mattes were fairly vibrant for it being a brand that tends to lean towards neutrals. But overall, like as much as I did enjoy it for a time, it just wasn't my thing anymore, you know? The Bloom palette. This one is a dupe of the Natasha Denona Love palette. And I wanted to love this one. Like, I did love this one. Let me start by saying that. I did really like this one. I love these colors. I do love Alter Ego shimmers. I think they're really pretty. But starting the palette before this one came out, I believe, or one of the palettes before this one, they started including a formula mixed in with their mattes that was more of like a creamy matte formula. Like, it wasn't a full-on like dry powder. It had a little bit of a creamier texture, and it was still a matte. And supposedly Natasha Denona also has that kind of formula in her palettes. I don't play with Natasha Denona palettes. It's just not a price range that I'm comfortable spending. So I can't compare formula-wise, but specifically in the Alter Ego palettes, their traditional mattes are so good, like really pigmented, really blendable. And I'm not a big fan of those creamy mattes from them. I find that, like, for instance, that really pretty purple, the second one on the bottom, that's that formula. It will never build up to be as rich as it looks in the pan. It always looks more light and more sheer. And I feel like it's always the darkest shades that have that formula. Like, even that really dark plum on the top right, it just doesn't get deep enough, and it drives me crazy, especially because the darkest shades are always that formula. So then I don't even feel like I'm getting the dark shades. So as much as I loved the overall vibe of this palette, I loved the mattes that were the actual mattes, I loved the shimmers, those creamy mattes that just kind of like took some of my favorite deepening shades from this palette away from me made me kind of sad. This next one is the Canyon palette. Honestly, looking back, I'm pretty surprised that I even used this one, because I feel like right now, if they were to come out with this one and they sent it to me, for instance, I would have just given this one to a friend, because one, again, I don't play with neutrals very often, and two, if I'm gonna play with neutrals, warm neutrals are not usually what I gravitate towards. I do prefer cooler tones when it comes to neutrals. So I'm surprised that I played with this one, because I feel like I should have known in my soul that I wouldn't have ended up keeping it, and I'd rather just give things to friends like untouched if I know I'm probably not gonna use it long term. But again, the formula was nice. If I remember correctly, I think all of these mattes were that traditional matte, but I could be mistaken, in that very dark, dark brown in the top right corner could be a creamy matte for all I know. But again, like, it was good. The shimmers are really pretty, nice metallic shine and all that, but definitely not my vibe. However, this one was my vibe, the Shadow Kiss. Love cool tone neutrals. I think they're so pretty. They just look so elegant and glamorous, and I love cool tone neutrals. And I actually thought this would be like a staple in my collection as far as cool tone neutrals go, but as it stands, some of the other cool tone neutral palettes that I already owned, I just preferred over this one. So I didn't need to keep a plethora of this kind of palette around, since I don't reach for it that often anyways. But I did quite enjoy this one. Again, if I'm remembering correctly, I think all of the mattes in this were that formula that I do like, but again, there might have been one of those creamy mattes that isn't my favorite. Shimmers were gorgeous, super metallic and amazing. I know this one and the Canyon palette were also duping Natasha Denona palettes, but I don't remember exactly the names of them because I'm not super well versed with Natasha Denona palettes, but yeah, moving on. I think this is the last Alter Ego one I have to talk about. This is the Artemis palette, and I loved this one hard for a couple years. And I think there was a time when I was like trying to force myself to like that creamy matte texture. This is the first palette they came out with, I believe, that had that creamy matte texture. And pretty much all of those rich jewel tone colors that are supposed to be mattes were that formula. So again, they never get as rich and as saturated as I would want them to. The shimmers in here were gorgeous. Looking back, there's like, it's just too big for what it is. Like, that whole top row could have been gotten rid of for me. This is duping the Metropolis palette, I believe, from Natasha Denona. So I know it's like already a large palette to begin with, but for me, I could have cut this palette down a good bit, gotten rid of the creamy matte texture, make them just traditional mattes, and then this palette would have been a lot better. But I will say, as much as like in retrospect, I recognize it might not have been like my perfect palette for a while, I did love it for a while. Like, I used it many times. It was super fun for me. I was able to make it work as much as possible, and I did enjoy playing with it, but looking back, I know now that it wasn't my favorite. Let's get into some ColourPop now. This is the Your Golden palette. Again, looking back, I'm really surprised that I even used this one when I got it in PR, because I swear if I got it now, I would have just given it away to a friend. just completely untouched because it's just riddled with way too many neutrals for my preference. I don't prefer large palettes. If I'm gonna use a large palette, it needs to offer something really special for me. I did like some of the shimmers that were in here. It's really pretty, but I remember when I was using this one, I was like, this is basically just a giant version of the Kathleen Light Dream Street palette from like years prior, which I don't have that one anymore, but I did remember loving that palette. So there were aspects of this palette that I did enjoy, but overall, just way too big, way too repetitive. This next one, I'm blanking on the name. I think it was called something like a jewel, like some kind of jewel palette. I don't think it's available anymore. Again, I feel like I just got suckered into those rich jewel tones that are like right in the middle because a lot of this palette is a waste for me. It's a lot of repeat light neutrals that I personally don't need. I like ColourPop's formulas, don't get me wrong. I think their mattes are fine and their shimmers are pretty. They're not like life-changing, but they're nice. I did get suckered into using this one though, just because of those rich jewel tones. And I appreciated them for what they were, but again, ultimately decluttered it just because it was large and in charge and not really for me. And honestly, I kind of forgot about this one. I forgot that this one existed. Oh, this one. I never would have expected to declutter this palette. This is I think it's called the Blow and Smoke palette. It used to be called the Smoke Show and then it changed names or something like that soon after it released. I had this for years. This came out during like the peak time when ColourPop was constantly launching monochromatic palettes back in like, I want to say like 2019, if I'm not mistaken. I loved this one. This was my go-to grayscale, black, gray, kind of smoky palette. I loved this one. I loved that metallic silver in the middle. I thought this was such a good example on how to do a good monochromatic palette because it had a perfect gradient, had really good shimmers to match anything you want to do in that vibe. I ultimately decluttered this one though, just because honestly, the Kaleidos Black Jasmine kind of stole my heart as far as like a grayscale palette goes. It's only a quad, but it has just the perfect level of like light gray, medium gray, black, and then a really pretty silver. So I just didn't need this one anymore. It served its time. I enjoyed it for a hot minute, but eventually I just didn't need this one anymore. But this one, I never thought I would see the day when I got rid of this one. Next up, the Honey palette. I also did not expect to get rid of this one. I think I got rid of both of these ColourPop palettes in last year's Declutter. This one again, like I had so much love for this palette. I love yellow eyeshadow. Even though there's a pressed glitter in here, which isn't my favorite, I still loved this one. I loved the gradient of the yellow mattes. I loved the different yellow shimmers. I thought they were really pretty. It just wasn't my go-to palette to reach for yellows anymore. I loved it for a while, but ultimately it just, I don't know, maybe I just kind of outgrew it. I just found other things that I preferred, but that was an iconic one. This next one is the Cloud Spun palette. This one was really cute. Again, there's a pressed glitter, which isn't my favorite thing, but overall I did like this one. I thought the gradient of pinks was really cute. We have kind of like reddish tones, more of a true pink. We have that darker, like almost berry reddish pink. The shimmers in here were super cute. There was a really pretty duochrome in the top corner. But again, I guess similar to the Ace Beauté Blossom Passion, because I decluttered both this one and that one last year. It wasn't my go-to to reach for pinks anymore, and I didn't need to keep it kicking around just for the sake of it, so ended up passing this one along to a friend also, but this one was fun to play with. I liked it. This was I believe it was the Hello Kitty Snow Much Fun is what it was called. I did enjoy this one. I think this one came out around winter time, like before Christmas of 2020, if my brain is correct. I thought it was cute. The whole collection was just adorable. I loved all the little Hello Kitty characters. I loved the just like wintry, pinky purple, snowy, frosty vibe. I thought this one was fun. The three shimmers on the top were cute, but overall this palette just like wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't one that I found myself like drawn to reach for again and again. I was tempted to keep it just because the packaging was really cute. It had a picture of like a snow globe and it was all sparkly with snow and like Hello Kitty was like ice skating or something on the inside. It was purely adorable, but overall it just wasn't a palette that was iconic enough in my life to keep it kicking around. This one, I'm also surprised that I decluttered this one because I thought I would keep it longer than apparently I did. This was the High Tide palette. I feel like this one came out at a really good time for them because they went through a phase where like all they did was monochromatic collections constantly. They were repeating themselves again and again. It was like, you can only do a red monochromatic collection so many times, ColourPop. But then they blessed us with this palette. It wasn't a huge giant collection. I believe it was just this palette and maybe 2 eyeliners. It was like a lot more tame of a collection. And this was such a good example of a monochromatic palette. Similar to the black one that I mentioned earlier, this one was so good. It just had such a good gradient of light to deep with the different teals. The different teal shimmers had a really good gradient as well. It was just so nice. There weren't like repeat shades within the palette itself. I loved this one. I thought it was such a fantastic one, but last year I did end up decluttering it just because I got lots of use out of it, but it just wasn't my go-to for teals. Like, I wasn't finding myself needing like just a monochromatic teal palette anymore in my life. And really, if I hadn't decluttered it then, I would definitely be decluttering it this year, because the Blend Bunny Lure palette not only has amazing teals and a perfect gradient, but it has a mixture of other colors. So it's like more inspiring to use. So as much as I did love this one and I thought it was a great monochromatic palette from them, I just didn't need it anymore. Let's maybe take a break from ColourPop. I still have 500 ColourPop palettes to go through. So let's take a break, do a couple other palettes, and then we will pick it up next time. The Lime Crime Venus 2 palette. I believe this one I decluttered in 2021 finally. I kept this one for years. It was such an iconic palette to me. I loved it. It was one of my favorite like grungy autumnal color stories. I loved the mixture of those dark grimy tones with that bright sky blue. It was so cool. Overall, I just ended up deciding, like, as much love as I used to have for it and as much nostalgia as it held for me, I didn't need to keep it just for that purpose. It wasn't my favorite formula anymore. It wasn't my go-to palette. I was kind of just hanging on to it for the memories, and I'm happy that I had fun with it, but I'm not sad that I let it go because it was time. Next, speaking of Natasha Denona, the only Natasha Denona palette I've ever tried actually was this 5-pan palette. It was the Mini Tropic palette. I got it as a gift, and I'm still super grateful that I got it as a gift. I thought it was fun for me to experience Natasha Denona's formula, although people have told me that this is not a good representation of her formula. But I don't know, because I don't want to spend the money on the larger palettes that supposedly people love. That's just not my journey. If it's your journey, I'm super happy for you. But I did enjoy this palette for what it was. I don't reach for 5-pan super often. I do prefer like 9 to 15 is my sweet spot, even like pushing 20. But 5-pans, like, it's fine. It's just not my go-to. But I like these colors. I love a blue, purple, green color story. The mattes were fine. The shimmers were good. It wasn't everything to me. I wasn't living, breathing, dying for it. So I did end up giving it to a friend. I kept it for a couple years, but then ultimately I was like, I don't want this just to collect dust. And even if something's a gift, like, I'm super appreciative and I'll cherish the memories of it, but I feel like it's such a waste if it's just sitting on a shelf. You know what I mean? I'd much rather give it to a friend who's gonna love and appreciate it and give it a second life. So that's what I ended up doing. Let's do these 2 Urban Decay ones and then we'll call it a day. This was the Eternals palette. The packaging of this was so obnoxious. It was this big box. They've done it before with past palettes, like over the years, but this big box, you open it up and it's like a pop-up book, and then you lift the flap underneath and the eyeshadow palette's inside. It's just so obnoxious. It was kind of hard to lift that flappy bit to get to the eyeshadows on the inside. And then again, looking back, this is just not a great color story. It's very boring with a couple touches of color. I think I was mostly just excited for this palette because I was excited for the movie in general. I really liked the Eternals. I feel like that's an unpopular opinion, but I thought it was a fun movie. I liked all the different characters and powers, but I digress. I did use this palette a couple times. I just felt kind of meh about it. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't life-changing by any means. I believe I decluttered this one in like 2021. And same with this one. I think this one I also decluttered in 2021. This was the Wild West palette, the Naked Wild West, if you will. For some reason, I just like felt like such a makeup slump after using this one. It wasn't horrible. Like, I didn't have blending issues or anything like that. Like, the formula was fine. It's like their normal naked formula, but I just felt so exhausted and bored after using it. I just felt like it was so uninspiring. It just wasn't my favorite thing. And it's funny like that I felt that way because looking at it now, like, I'm still not obsessed with this color story. I think it's kind of bland and not the best, but it's not the worst color story I've seen. But I just remember feeling excited that there were a couple pops of color in here and then like going to use it and just feeling tired. A very not exciting release in my personal opinion. But to be fair, Urban Decay doesn't come out with very many palettes that pique my interest nowadays. They come out with some good complexion products and I love the liners they came out with recently, but that palette was exhausting. And I think that's where I want to leave it today. I still have many palettes to talk about if you want me to continue walking down memory lane with you, revisiting some palettes that have since left my collection. I think it's fun to chat about makeup's history, chat about how I felt in the time versus how I feel now. I feel like looking back and reflecting on things makes me a better makeup consumer now because I'm very aware of like the things that I do and don't like. I am a lot better with PR too. Like I don't try everything just for the sake of trying it just because I got sent it. I like to be very cautious of what I'm using in the sense of like, is this just going to be a one and done thing and I'll never touch it again? Like, do I have no desire to use it and just want to use it just for the sake of it? Or do I think I might at least get some uses out of it before I decide to let it go? So I'm a lot better at being able to determine like, should I even open this? Should I give it to friends? That kind of thing. And even with buying things, like I don't feel that sense to like buy absolutely everything just because it exists. I want to really reflect and think about like, does this fill a hole in the collection that I already have? Am I gonna get extra joy out of this versus things that I already own? Stuff like that. I think this is fun. I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you tried any of the palettes that I had decluttered in this video? Are you interested in any of them to this day? I would love to chat down below. If you made it to the end of this video, why don't you leave some emojis that you used to use, but you don't use anymore? And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps my channel out a lot. And if you're not already, you can subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. I'm posting most days here as well. You can also join my channel memberships if you would like. I'll have the link to join down in my description box. You'll get a cute little bat badge next to your name. You'll get access to exclusive emojis, and you'll get a members only exclusive Get Ready With Me once a month, which I believe the first one has already been uploaded by the time this video goes up. So you can already check that one out and stay tuned for the upcoming ones over the coming months. I'm also battybean on everything, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter if you want to join the battybean fam. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Okay, bye. Did you just hear that bird? I literally just have to say the goodbye spiel of my outro, and Lawnmower Man's here. I don't even know why he's here today. It's Tuesday. They usually mow on Fridays. It's the breaks. That's just how it goes.